So welcome everyone. We are doing a short little video about the Bronze Age of comics. As you guys know, we've been doing the Indie Comics Team Up event this December. It's where lots of different artists homage covers from different time periods and include the characters of other indie artists. It's been a very fun event. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the Bronze Age of comics. We're going to talk a little bit about DC, a little bit about Marvel, and a little bit about indie. I have a stack of comics. I'm going to be showing the covers. But before I do, let's talk a little bit about our personal history with the Bronze Age of comics. What are some Bronze Age titles that stick out to you that really mean something to you?
So for me, I think the Marvel Secret Wars would probably go right in there. That one was like a big thing for a lot of us who grew up in the 1980s because they had like all of the Marvel characters in there. And, you know, of course, they had the cross marketing with all the toys and everything. So, you know, they had the first issue of Secret Wars that had that great cover from Mike Zeck that had like, I think 16 Marvel characters on it, and even a couple who were cut out.
Oh my God.
I think the original version had like 18 or 19 on it.
Yeah.
And they ended up having to take like 2 or 3 of them out for cover copy. and so that is just like a great Bronze Age image, I think. And, you know, probably another one that would go in that same line with big company crossovers would be the DC Crisis on Infinite Earths.
The Bronze Age really started those big crossovers, didn't it? Like, and if you nowadays we're kind of like we're jaded to it. We're like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, another crossover. But if you were a kid and they're like, hey, all your characters are together now, you're like, what?
Yeah, it was a big deal back then. Like, it was huge.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of lost a lot of its specialness, I guess.
Yeah. So while I was flipping through, I realized the Bronze Age comics that really stick out to me are the DC comics. Somehow that rings a bell with me a bit more than the Marvels from that time. And I think a big part of that is the covers. I have a controversial theory that DC Bronze Age covers have less shit on them than Marvel Bronze Age covers. Like, Marvel is like the whole top half is like advertisement for Marvel, and then like you get some cover art at the bottom. I feel like DC did a little bit less of that.
Yeah, DC in the I want to say in the Silver Age, they used to have this thing with like a checkerboard thing like along the top, and it looked horrible. And I think as a reaction to that, they kind of moved away from that, where Marvel kept building on theirs. So yeah, DC probably smartly moved away from some of those really heavy tread dress type elements in the
so they might have been worse in the 60s, and then they're like, whoa,
I feel like they might have been.
Yeah. So I got a few covers I'd like to go through. If you have any comic trivia you want to bring up about these covers, or if anything catches your eye, just jump in about it.
See, I brought nothing to the party, so.
This one kind of made me think about how much that Marvel has on their Bronze Age covers. Like, it's got still only 35 cents, pretty cool corner box, Marvel Comics Group, Comics Code, issue number, The Defenders, at last, what's happening, more text down here. And then
there's some serious blobs of text on there.
And it's such a shame because this is like Kirby art, right? Like that you don't want to mess with Kirby art too much. If it's not Kirby,
it looks Kirby? I'm not sure.
Let me find out here. I was thinking because of these Fourth World guys with the weird armor, they look kind of Kirby-esque.
If nothing else, it's doing the Kirby design elements well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's find out here.
back then it was hard to find. That was the other thing, is it's hard to find credit for cover art. A lot of the time, the artist on the inside would be the same as the cover artist, but yeah, it was pretty rare to find actual artist credit until, what was it, like the mid '80s, I think.
I'm seeing a bunch of no names in this comic.
Yeah.
We got D. Kraft for the story, E. Hannigan for the art, B. Patterson for the inks, and then nice and big Jim Shooter, editor in chief.
Oh, Jim Shooter. Well, you know, he had to make sure he got his credit.
That's right. As far as I can tell, this comic was written and drawn by Jim Shooter.
That's the way he would have it. But yeah, so, that actually, you bring up something there, though. You know, the whole thing of artist credit and stuff like that didn't become a really big thing until the mid '80s, which was, you know, close to the end of the Bronze Age. That was the whole thing where, you know, it came out that Marvel had taken all of Jack Kirby's artwork and was like passing them out to people and stuff like that.
So that was like a transitional time, because I think Bronze Age goes 70 to 85, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was right around the mid '80s that it really came out that it was a huge issue, and Kirby's family was really pushing to try to make sure that he got equitable credit for all of his creative works, and that he was adequately compensated, because Marvel was keeping all of his work as work for hire, and like horrible things are happening to that artwork. I think of the thousands of pages he produced, he only managed to get like 80 or something like that. It was disgusting.
Yeah, it was a really bad scene, and it might have marked kind of the transition to the modern era where artists and writers were a bit bigger of a deal. I remember like Frank Miller got involved, and he did these like charity pieces to try to get Kirby his art back, and like people started thinking about writers and artists, like the idea that Frank Miller did Dark Knight Returns, and that was a big deal. That was in like magazines and stuff, and his name was everywhere. That might not have happened in '83, like,
right?
But it did happen in '87. So my DC comics from this time period, a bit more obscure. Like I think I've gotten them all out of dollar bins and stuff like that. Kids, you remember this classic? Enter the World of the Warlord.
Oh, I had a friend who was really into those.
Really? I don't know anything about it. I've read it and I don't know anything about it.
It's kind of dense, you know. It goes into that whole you know, sword and sorcery kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's sort of impenetrable to someone like me.
I have a Night Force DC cover. Night Force was cool because who was the artist? It was a big deal. Oh yeah, Marv Wolfman was the writer, and Gene Colan did pencils. So it's Gene very Colan. Much in line with horror books that had a big resurgence in the Bronze Age, like the 70s in particular. There were times where on the shelves you might see more horror comics than you would see superhero comics per se. Horror had a really good time in the Bronze Age, and I like Night Force because it's like horror mixed with superheroes. It has that Gene Colan visual style. All the characters are like either vampires or ghosts or some shit, but like they're still in the DC superhero world.
Yeah, that's another interesting thing that kind of came up was you know, that whole thing with the relaxing of the comics code. Because, you know, going back into comics history, you know, the horror comics were huge back in the, you know, back like tail end of Golden Age, I think, was when we were seeing a lot of the EC comics and the, you know, Tales from the Crypt, that kind of stuff, with the really gruesome, gory covers and the freaky flesh melted zombies and stuff like that. And you know, we had like that whole thing with Dr. Wordham and the Comics Code Authority shut them all down. And so then I think it was late Silver Age, early Bronze Age that we really started to kind of see the Comics Code relax a little bit on that because they allowed the drug story with Spider-Man and everything.
That's right. That's right. The Stan Lee drug story. And to prepare for this video we're making, I watched one YouTube video about the Bronze Age of comics. And mostly the video was about how social issues were starting to get addressed. Like Stan Lee started it by doing the Spider-Man drug story that was not code approved. And then both companies kind of ran with that and started to include poverty, drug use, racial tensions. The racial tension thing was famously handled by Denny O'Neil in the Green Lantern, Green Arrow series. Like that dove into racism in America in a way that it really hadn't been addressed in comics before.
Yeah, in some ways it almost feels like they've maybe gone back on that in a weird sort of way.
Yeah. If the Green Arrow story came out today, a bunch of bloggers would be like, virtue signaling. What's next? A girl superhero? Jeez.
it's inauthentic. It's the wrong voice writing this. Yeah.
That too. It would be wrong on two fronts. It would be wrong for being preachy and also wrong for being written by the wrong identities. Yeah. For its time period, though, that was starting a conversation that wasn't happening in the medium. Would it be approached the same way today? Probably not, but it was probably important for its time.
Oh yeah, very much. Yeah, that groundbreaking still needs to be done regardless of who it's coming from.
And speaking of groundbreaking, I have some indie comics from this time period. To me, this is a night and day difference between what Marvel and DC were doing. I love what Marvel and DC were doing, but just from looking at covers, let me grab, so DC was kind of guilty of putting shit on their covers. Like this is a pretty ugly cover, part of a mini series. I don't know. Keep this image in your mind and compare it to what Eclipse was doing at the same time. This is the same
look at that.
I think it's the same year. This does not look like the same kind of comic book cover.
Yeah, like that is arty.
Yes. This is this seems like a book. Like you could read this.
Yeah, there's some real respect to the compositional elements there to just make sure it's not overwhelmed with text and cover copy.
Absolutely. And monotone as well. Like it's all blue with an orange title. Not a lot of cover here. And this is the first issue. So they didn't come out with all their rainbow colors blaring. Like they decided, you know what, we're going to stand out from the pack. We're going to have like a blue and black cover. I'm not sure a cover like this would have passed the editorial boards of DC or Marvel at the time.
Oh, definitely not. No, I think, the bigger a company gets, that's the other tricky thing is you end up with all these company mandates. And I'm pretty sure it was one of those things that was in effect in editorial in Marvel and DC at the time was, this cover needs to do this. It needs to tell this kind of story, have this many characters, needs to have this much to, determine the cover elements. That's why it's more exciting when you see like those covers that jumble the elements around, where you have like the broken logos, like the one on Uncanny X-Men, or you have like the logo dominating the cover, like on that old Steranko Hulk cover. When you have things like that really kind of break the formula, then it can really look pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. It really draws your attention. Yeah. I have some a few more indie covers from that era. I collected the comic DN Agents. I didn't keep all the issues, but I've kept a lot of them. And I like looking at this series as a progression, how it moves in a more indie, more artistic direction. This is the cover for issue number 4. It's interesting for sure. A lot of text at the top. These floating head characters watching a fight scene. The fight scene is supposed to draw you in. It is cool that they are giving the authors and artists credit. So I don't want to make fun of this cover too much because that's a big deal. That's good stuff. But this is the next issue. Very different. Pretty bold composition here. Not a lot of text on the page. And then this one, to me, gives a whole different emotional resonance. Like I have a very different response to this cover than I do the one a couple issues ago.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You see like a really wide range of effects going on there. You have a very standard superhero cover, and then you kind of slowly go into different territory until you're at this, which is it's a very cramped crowd scene, and you're meant to really feel like these characters are uncomfortable with that. They're uncomfortable with that attention, and it shows very strongly. It's well done.
Yeah, and I don't see any hint that violence is even about to happen. Like nobody's about to throw a punch, anything like that. And that's a change from the previous two covers as well. I mean, this one is well composed, but it's an action scene. It's kind of bold for an indie comic company to be like, hey, our characters are going to feel uncomfortable talking to reporters this issue. Like that's a bold move.
Yeah, and that's one of those great things about having an indie comic is that, you have fewer hands in the pot. You have fewer people to tell you what to do when you're working on them. It's like, I know for you and I, when we work on our own comics, that, it's very freeing to just kind of be able to go out there and do what you're going to do. And the more often people are telling you about what they would want to see in your comic, the more you kind of feel like, yeah, but this doesn't ring true for me,
Absolutely. It might be a good idea. Like it's probably worth somebody doing it, but that someone might not be me. I've got my own direction I'm taking. So while we're recording this video, it's still November. We haven't actually, I hate to break the illusion for those of you at home. We're filming this in November. We haven't drawn all of our covers yet. But while you're composing in your mind your covers for Indie Comic Team Up, what are some challenges you've been running into, homaging these eras and including other creators? What's challenging for you?
So one of the really great things I think that you brought into the discussion was the idea of covers that were not necessarily comic book covers. And I thought that was a great idea. And, kind of looked into the idea of album covers and advertising and things like that. And it is so hard. Like it is really tough to find really good images that kind of work with that time frame. And so I at one point I had like the box art from the Clue game from the 1960s. And I was thinking, oh, this would be really neat. I can just put 6 characters in here. And then the more I looked at it, I'm like, wait a minute, this is a game about all these people wanting to kill each other. And, can I figure out 6 characters from people I respect that would be okay with the idea of their character being a murderer? And I'm like, maybe not.
Maybe I know 2 people like that, but not 6.
Like, yeah, maybe they kill each other to get some publishing done. But yeah, that was pretty tough. The other thing was that the layout was completely rectangular. And since we're working mainly in Instagram's putting everything in squares. And so then I was like, well, between trying to make these characters fit from a, like a thought standpoint and trying to make them work from a compositional standpoint, it just like killed me. I spent all day trying to figure it out and I got really frustrated with it. And then advertising, like that's another one of those things. Like we can think of some really good iconic advertisements, but how cluttered are they? How many elements are in there? Like you're talking about blocks of text, and we talked about like the old Charles Atlas ad where the guy gets beat up at the beach.
Yeah,
and that one, it has like 3 characters in it, and most of it is dominated entirely by the dialogue and the text. And it's like, well, maybe we can't make that work. just little things like that. It's like these little touchstones will spring up in our minds, and then upon looking at them again, you realize, oh, this had like 50 characters on it, or this only had 2. And it's like, I
The
don't
image
know.
you have in your mind is maybe more clean, more emotionally
Right.
resident than what's actually on the page. Like you've
Yeah,
built it
little
up
Mandela
over
effect
the
there.
years. Well, that's a good segue because talking about advertisements that stick in your mind from this time period, I would like to wrap things up by showing my favorite / least favorite use of advertising on a cover. I love Spider-Woman. This is one of my favorite Marvel characters. And at the top, I'm just gonna zoom in on that. This is they put this on the cover.
Yeah, you know that, I don't know, that kind of gets me into the whole Spider-Woman experience right there. You can see that there's a profound action scene there happening above the city, and you know, nothing brings me into that like the idea of being on a 10-speed racer, and not only that, but entering a contest for one.
That's right. That's right. I mean, like, oh my gosh, there's
Now,
flipping.
this is definitely something that pulls fully to mind that thing you were saying about Marvel having too much junk on their covers.
Yeah. This is if we were delivering a court case or something, I would save this evidence till the end so the jury could just like think about it. But
they made me buy the 10-speed racer.
Marvel tried to make up for it by releasing the classic X-Men covers, but the damage had already been done with that Spider-Woman cover. Well, let us know what you guys think in the covers, in the comments. Were we too unfair to Marvel? Was Marvel actually doing some really clean covers during that time period? And what challenges are you guys running into while you craft these covers for the Indie Comic Team Up Challenge?
Find out more about how to get involved in the Indie Comic Team Up on Instagram at Indie Comic Union.